may take a little time, but I'm gonna win. Hey, hey, ooh, hey, hey. It may take a little time, but I'm gonna win.
What's going on? How y'all feeling, Foundry? Y'all good? Yeah, I want to see who's in the house. We got anybody from Prosper in the house today? Yeah, not bad, not bad. How about Frisco? I thought that would be much bigger. I'll show you how it's done. I'm going to go to my hometown, McKinney. Yeah, man, it's good to see you guys. Good to be in the house with you. I love doing these things, hanging out with the dudes, having a good time. And this is not my first rodeo here. I'm back and excited to be back here again. As I'm starting to kind of get this thing going, I was talking to Aaron about doing what we were doing, right? And I think he has it in for me, right? Because the last time I came here, I had to put a message together where you had to put together Father's Day and Juneteenth in the same message. Are you kidding me? You know how hard that is? I thought it was a setup. But I did something right because he called me back. I didn't fail the way he wanted me to, so he said, I got another challenge for you. I'm gonna have you come to this men's thing in February. I'm like, dope, what's it about? He's like, haha, I'll let you know. A month ago, I'm like, hey, are we still doing this? What do you want me to talk about? What's the theme? He said, this is the theme, and he showed me the Foundry website, and I said, not my first rodeo. You bringing in a black pastor in a rodeo theme? Name me one superstar black rodeo guy right now. Don't worry, I'll wait. No, that doesn't count. But I do appreciate you had a name. Now, this is fun though, but see what Aaron, what he doesn't know is I'm from Texas, I'm from Houston. Like, I've known about rodeo since I was a kid. In fact, let me show you my first rodeo. Let's take a look up here at this little pic there. Come on. Oh my gosh. All right, let's examine this picture just for a second here. First of all, I told you I'm from Houston, so that is the Astrodome in the back, right? That's how old this shot is. And you can see that 4 of the 5 kids in the shot do not want to be here at all. My cousin Gary on the far right is like, I don't even want to look at the camera. I'm so embarrassed about what I'm wearing. But I was looking at this picture. I called my mom. I was like, Mom, I need this picture. And as I was looking, I was like, man, look at this. I got like roper boots on, some Wranglers, a cowboy shirt, a cowboy hat. I'm going to grow out of this. I'm 4 years old. I'm going to grow out of it by the end of the rodeo. But my parents are investing in this rodeo. And I couldn't understand what I was doing here with that. But we loved going to the rodeo when I was in Houston. I mean, we went all the time, and we always went on the nights that the black singers would sing. So if like Lionel Richie was in, we were in. Patti LaBelle, Frankie Beverly and Mays, Morris Day, we were there. And growing up in the space that I did, I grew up in a predominantly white area, and there was a lot of ways in which we engaged some racist things that happened. When I was growing up, I wondered, did we go on that day just to see the black singers, or was that the only day that black people could go to the rodeo? I mean, come on now, it was Negro Day, you know, we did all that stuff. You're laughing too hard at that. I'm not comfortable with that much laughter about that joke. So we went to the rodeo for a long time, probably till I was 11 or 12, and then after that, I was done. I had nothing to do with rodeo. I wasn't interested in cowboy boots, nothing like that. In fact, the last time I did anything that was close to rodeo, I was in college, and a friend of mine, her family had some land out west of Fort Worth, and I went to TCU, and so we were like, hey, let's go out there. They're gonna be doing kind of the Yellowstone thing, you know, where they're moving cattle from like pasture to pasture, and they're doing like border collie shows, and they've got like a pit set up where they're roping, you know, calves and hoofing pigs and castrating bulls or whatever they're doing in there. And I'm looking around, and everybody's in Western gear, and I'm there in like some Jordans and a Tommy Hilfiger jacket. It's just not my space. It wasn't what I was into, you know what I mean? But I loved this theme that we've got. This is not my last rodeo. I love that theme. This idea of the confidence, right? To sit in the space, to come to your first challenge. And in the midst of that, you don't get any fear. You go, hey, this is not my first rodeo. I love that. It's a really important thing. But I think living in a world that we live in and doing what we do, like, I want to say it when it's fun. You know what I mean? Like, we don't get to say it when it's fun. When I read my books, my like Black Ops, CIA books, or I'm watching, Bourne, that's the kind of folks that get to say that line with a lot of gusto. You know what I mean? Like they're there all geared up in a house, protecting civilians. There's 100 people outside with tanks and helicopters and grenade launchers, and the civilians are like, don't go out there, what are you gonna do? It's so dangerous. They're like, hey, this is not my first rodeo. And they walk into that, and you're like, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. My moments are like suburban dad moments. When you go to the grocery store and you get through the self-checkout line without any problem, and the attendant's like, good job, and I'm like, not my first rodeo, bro. I can do this. I don't think I've ever said the phrase, actually, until last week, because I think this was on my mind. I was down in Houston visiting my parents. We're driving around Houston, and their parents are at the age now that I have to drive them everywhere, which is the worst, because my dad is like the backseat passenger driver. Like, he is all on my stuff. He's always critiquing how I drive. And I was in there, and he was critiquing. He's like, Markus, you got to do this, you got to do this. I'm like, Dad, I am 45 years old. I've got kids and a mortgage. I've been driving for 30 years. This is not my first rodeo. I was like, oh, there it was. And it still didn't sound very cool. I just be clear, it wasn't very cool. But that's what we're doing. Like, we're here talking about this is not our first rodeo. But the thing about it is, sometimes it actually is your first rodeo. I've got my oldest son here, and he's the one who, pushed us into parenting. Wasn't planning on it until I had a son. Now I got a parent. What do I do? And it's, when I'm looking at him sometimes, I make mistakes, and I'm like, sorry, this is kind of my first rodeo at this, I'm saving college money for your brother, but you got counseling money. It's going to be okay. We're going to be good. But even sometimes, there's this concept of this confidence, being able to kind of look at your next thing and be really confident about it. It's just not easy, because sometimes it's just big stuff, you know what I'm saying? Sometimes it's stuff you never even dreamed that was going to come to you. Like, you have a child, you go into the room and you find drugs in their room, right? Or you got to bail them out of jail for something they did, or you're at your job and you think everything is going really well, but then something happens and you lose your job and you have nothing. Or maybe you have a health scare, you know what I mean? Like a diagnosis that wasn't favorable for you or somebody you love, or maybe you even lose somebody you love. Or maybe your wife came into your room and said she just doesn't love you anymore. There's another guy. Man, that's tough. How do we have the confidence to step into all situations, including those, and have the confidence to say, this is not my first rodeo? What I love is that God doesn't just leave us alone with this. Actually, there is some great passages that actually help us kind of move through. And so what I want to do is, if you have your Bibles, open up to 1 Samuel 17. And those of you who are Bible drill folks, you will recognize this. This is the David and Goliath passage. And I think there's some things that we can really learn from how David was doing what he was doing. Right? And if you don't know this, if you don't know the story, let me just summarize it real quick for you. So the way it starts out is you've got the Israelites, and they're setting up these battle lines on one mountain, and you've got the Philistines, their enemies, on another mountain. And they've got this valley in between them, and every single day, this giant comes out. 9 foot 6 inches monster warrior comes out, and he challenges the armies of Israel, saying this: why have you come here out to draw me up for battle? I have to do voiceovers. I'm a voiceover artist, so I have to do voiceovers. You have to do it. And I don't know, for whatever reason, because I'm an 80s child, all my villains are like some kind of Russian, Eastern European. No offense to any of you out here, just this is where it is. Why have you come out to draw me up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourself and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us. And the Philistines said, I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that may fight, we may fight together. When Saul and all of Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed, and greatly afraid. So get the picture. Every single day, this monster would come out and he would defy the armies of Israel. And every single day, when he did his thing, the Israelites would scatter. Like I said, I'm from Houston, and so when it gets wet down there's a lot of roaches down there. And when I was growing up, you come in at night, you click on that light, and those roaches just scatter, right? So this is that dude. Goliath would come out, and he'd turn on the light every single day, and they would just scatter like roaches. Then David, the hero of the story, he's sent to the battle lines to give his brothers some food, and he gets to the battle lines right about the time that Goliath comes out and says all of this stuff. And when he sees the Israelites scatter, he's like, where y'all going, man? Who's gonna take care of this fool? He's like, you can do it. He's like, you know what? I will do it. Thank you very much. And he goes to King Saul and he says, King Saul, I want to go and engage this man. He says to him this, he goes, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And David meets Goliath in battle, and spoiler alert, he kills Goliath. So I want to unpack just some components of this, because you have to wonder, how did he get the confidence and the courage to be able to stand up against this monster that nobody else was willing to stand up against? And how then does that translate into how we do it? And there's just one thing that I want you to remember. This is how you're going to be able to have that confidence. So you're listening? This is really profound. The way you have this confidence is you do you, boo-boo. Do you, boo-boo? That's how you do it. Turn to somebody you know and say, do you, boo-boo? Yeah, you really feel silly now, don't you? I love it. I just thought, can I get them to say boo-boo out loud? Can I get them to do it? They did it. Fantastic. So if you want to do this, you got to do you, boo-boo, right? And part of the ways that you do you is a couple of things. And the first way that you're able to do you and model after what David taught us is you have to have clarity on who you are and to whom you belong. See, David knew who he was. David was a king. You see, in the chapter right before this, he had just been anointed as king by God himself. See, King Saul had messed around and God was done with him. He's like, I need a new king. So he sends his prophet Samuel into the house of Jesse. He looks at the boys and God points to David and he says, arise, anoint him, for this is he. This is my king. So David goes to Goliath knowing that he had this confidence because he was already anointed to be the next king. But even before that, David was also a shepherd. And the thing about shepherds is every single day, what shepherds do is they get in between enemies and their flock. They protect them. Every single day, that's what they're looking to do. How can I protect this flock and nurture this flock from the enemies out there? So when David shows up at the moment to fight Goliath, he is the shepherd king, and he went into default mode, and he said, I see an enemy coming after God's flock, and I'm gonna put myself in between and protect them, just like I've been doing every single day. David knew who he was. He also knew to whom he belonged. He says this in verse 26, he says, what shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? David understood that he was not just an individual out doing what he needed to do, but he was a part of a body. He was a part of a collective, a people group. You see, it's difficult sometimes for us to understand in our American society because we're so hyper-individualized. In fact, on a scale, we're the most individualistic country in the entire world. And so when we read the Bible and we see these kinds of things, it's hard for us to grapple with that. But for David, he didn't see himself just as David, but he saw himself David, the Israelite. David, part of God's people. And so he connected to that engagement and pledged allegiance to that group to do with them and protect them. And I think it's important for us to understand a couple of things here. Because it's important to know to whom you belong. As I said, my son is in here. My sons went out, when they were in elementary school, they went to a school called the McClure Marshall. Some of you guys maybe have kids over there. And what they would do every month is they would do these award ceremonies. They called them the Stampede. Reed, you remember the Stampede? And so they would do these Stampede, and the kids would all stand up and they would do these pledges. They would do pledge allegiance to the flag of America. They'd pledge allegiance to a Texas flag. And then they would do like the McClure motto. And the McClure motto started out with, it would say like, I'm a McClure Marshall, that's who I am. And every time, my son remembers this, I would go after the whole Stampede was over and he got his award, I'd run down and I'd say, no. This is not who you are. You are a part of God's people. You are a part of God's nation, the people of God. Yes, you live in America. Yes, you live in Texas. And yes, you go to McClure. But that is not who you are. If you're going to pledge your full allegiance, your primary allegiance, it needs to be to God and his people alone. Now, you clap. But this is important for us to remember as men this year. Because you will be tempted to take an identity and think you belong to a Republican Party or a Democratic Party. And we need men who are part of God's people that come in and act like God's people in the midst of all the turmoil and bring what God's people bring, which is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and God help us, self-control. This is what the people of God need to bring this year, and I'm challenging everybody I speak in front of. I'm challenging the room to be different this year than we've been in the past and make a point as God's people. David knew who he was and to whom he belonged. He had clarity on that. The second thing you need if you're going to do you, boo-boo, is you need community. You need people making sure you do you. See, what community does around you is it affirms the ways in which God has made you, and it holds you accountable to it. For David, when he got anointed as king, Samuel, the prophet of God, was there and anointed him, also affirming him. David was also anointed and affirmed in front of his brothers and his dad. And so he had this community that was going to be able to affirm the gifts that he had and hold him accountable. Now, his community didn't always do that. But you have got David understanding he needed this community to do this. We need community too, guys. If we're going to go about this battle that is out here, the Goliaths, and we need the confidence to do us, we're going to need people around us who can look at us and go, hey, I know this is your gift set and who you are. In fact, most of the ways that we find out what we're really good at is somebody else has to tell us because we don't always believe it. And so that's why community is so important. Nobody in here is self-made. When I hear that, it drives me crazy. Every Christian who says they're self-made doesn't understand that God said, I knit you in your mother's womb. I made you. And when you were born, you couldn't even wipe your behind without somebody else helping you. You have always had a community. The only reason you are who you are is because of community. So why, when we get older, do we think we don't need it anymore? I've got a really good one. My best friend growing up, 6 years old. I was pondering leaving the vocation I was in, the church I was at, to pursue this ministry that I currently run now. And I had really been feeling that God was moving me towards this. This is where I was going to go. I shared it with him. And when I was on sabbatical thinking through this, he came out to the cabin and sat with me, and he goes, when are you going to leave this church, man? I said, what are you talking about? He said, you have told me over and over, and I've seen in you that God is preparing you to do what this ministry is asking you to do, and you're still working at this church. I said, what do you expect me to do? Like, I need to make some money. I need insurance. Right, what am I doing? I go out there and I don't have anything. He goes, no, I think you're just disobedient. Wait. I think you're just disobedient to what God is asking you to do, and I think you're a coward. Because you know that God has always been there for you. The money will come, Marcus. You need to be obedient to what God is asking you to do. Now, I know this fool since I was 6 years old. That's why you can talk to me like that. None of y'all can talk to me like that just yet. Just need you to know. Don't be getting no crazy ideas. But you need this kind of accountability, someone who's going to walk with you and challenge you to this. And this is why your churches are trying to say, men, come together, be in groups, be in community, and push one another for affirmation and accountability. Because if you want to do you, boo-boo, you need clarity on who you are, who you belong to, and you need to have a community that will help you do you. Third thing you need to do is you need to have the courage to step forward as you. Look what this says in how David engaged this. So David, when he went and told Saul that he was going to fight the Goliath, Saul did this. Saul clothed David with his armor. He put on a helmet of bronze on his head, and he clothed him in a coat of mail. And David strapped his sword over his armor, and he tried in vain to go, for he had not tested them. Then David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. So David put them off. Then he took his staff in his hand. He chose 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in his shepherd's pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. See, David knew who he was. Saul was a soldier. Saul was used to the armor and the swords and all that, but David was a shepherd. And it doesn't make sense for David to try to go out and be a soldier when God made him to be a shepherd. And so he took the courageous step to move forward to do him as him. And that's an important thing for us to go. Now, it's hard sometimes, right? Because what happens is when the big things come, if we've been doing us, if we've been doing you, boo-boo, right? The big things come, sometimes it's really tempting to go, you know what, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do this way. I need to do it like so-and-so does it because they seem to be really good at it. And that makes sense, right? You need some of that in your life. There's gonna be mentors that come along and coaches and directors that help you know how to do certain things. Like here's how you hit the tennis ball, here's how you throw it. That's good, but you need to imitate and then innovate. Innovate in the sense that you do it the way God has positioned you to do it. Because when you do it in a way that's not like yourself, then if you win and you succeed, you don't know if you'll be able to do it again as you. And then the next time you'll just do it the way you did it before, which was not as you, and you'll lose incentive to actually go forward and live into what God has created you specifically to do. And then you'll miss out on actually living into what God has prepared you to and how that blesses you and blesses others. I actually struggle with this in my own life. I told you I grew up in a predominantly white environment, and I'm a singer. I love to sing. And throughout my entire life, people were always trying to meld my voice. They were trying to change it and make it sound like the churches I was at, which were predominantly white churches like this. You gotta sing like this, your voice has gotta be straight. You gotta take out the vibrato in your voice. You gotta take the timbre out, sing lighter, all of those things. And so as I went through and I started going to different places, it finally came to this one. I was working at a church, and the worship minister came to me and said, I want you to come and lead worship on Wednesday nights. And I go to rehearsal and I go, okay, how do you want me to sing this? He's like, what are you talking about? I said, do you want light voice? Do you want vibrato? What do you want? He goes, Markus, I want you to do you. I want you to do what you do. And I was like, that's awesome. What is that? What do I sound like? What does Markus sound like? And over the years, I've been constantly toiling and getting things together. In fact, my friend that I told you called me a coward, that guy. Last week, I sang at his father's funeral. And I sang a song that I'd sung at lots of funerals in the past. I hadn't sung in years. And so when it started, I kind of went right back into the way in which people had trained me to sing. It was a song, the Lord's Prayer, and I sang it. Our Father, which art in heaven. Right? Very operatic. I'd been trained in that. But I was fighting it the whole time. I was like, this is not, what is this? Didn't feel right. And finally it got to a point where I was like, I'm done with this. I'm just going for it. And I was like, for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory. And I just went after it. And as I was singing, I looked out in the crowd, and people had burst into tears. And afterwards, people came up and they're saying, Markus, I just love that song. And there was some point in the song where something changed. And it was like the whole room just filled with God's glory. Because I was doing me, the way I'd been designed to do. So you gotta have the courage to do you as you. And this is hard, right? You actually, to do this and to engage with it better, you need to have the next thing, which is consistency. Consistency, constantly doing you in the way that God has designed you. And I love what the great prophet Miles Davis says. He said, the longer you do something, the more you sound like yourself. Listen to that. The longer you do something, the more you sound like yourself. Listen how David engaged it. David's talking to Saul. He said, Saul's like, you're not gonna be able to beat this Goliath. He's too big. And David says this, he said, your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and when there came a lion or a bear and took the lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he arose against me, I caught him up by his beard and I struck him and I killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defiled the armies of the living God. David is giving his tail-kicking resume. I'd say butt-kicking, but these are animals, so they have tails, right? He's given his tail-kicking resume, and we know from understanding how shepherds work in that area of the world, lions and bears are not the only predators he had to deal with. In fact, what probably happened is he had smaller animals they had to deal with. Check out these potentials that he had. So first, he probably was dealing with a bobcat, right? Which is about 2 feet tall. So he had to engage that bobcat. Then there are the red foxes that are there. They're about 3 feet 6 inches. And then you get to the lion, right? Which is at his shoulder to paw, 4 foot 5 inches. And then you got a bear standing up 6'7". And now he's going against Goliath at 9 foot 6 inches. Let me tell you, David has been working up the road to this. He started as a bobcat, and here's the thing. When he first saw the bobcat, it probably looked like a Goliath. But once he got through that, and he slayed that bobcat, and he looked back, slayed that Goliath, he looked back and he found it was just a bobcat. And then he did it with the fox, and then he did it with the lion, and then he did it with the bear, and now he is at Goliath, and what he's saying is, hey, Saul, this is not my first rodeo, bro. There you go. I do this every single day. And he went and slayed these animals, and he said, I'm going to do the same with this man here. Because one thing I think he understood is that as he goes along, these trials didn't get easier, right? They got harder. But he took it every single time. And we have to understand, as we come to our Goliaths, sometimes we look at him and go, this is so hard. Like, what are we going to do? Surely it gets easier. And I love what the coach, Carol Lawson, said from Duke. And she said, things don't get easier. Life doesn't get easier. You just do hard better. Because as these things came, you had to be ready to encounter them and take them down. And he's getting better. He knew that his first Goliath was not his last, and this Goliath would not be his last. And so it's interesting for us that when we come up against these difficult things, we have to know that our next rodeo is not our last rodeo because it's not God's first rodeo. Listen to what David had to say in the way he did it. He said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. This was his not my first rodeo moment. He trusted that God would bring him through. Now, as you get clarity and you have community and you have courage and you have consistency, you know what comes. Criticism. Criticism. Look what David had to deal with. He had criticism from his brothers. Verse 28, they're like, I know your presumption and the evil in your heart, for you come down to see the battle. And look what David says in verse 29. He says, what have I done now? Was it not nothing but a word? I like that last phrase there. What have I done now? Which means they've been constantly on this dude. Over and over again, they've been criticizing him, and he's had to overcome it. And then he goes to Saul. And in verse 33, Saul says, you're not able to go against this Philistine and fight him. You're but a youth, and he's been a man of war from his youth. And then finally, when he goes and Goliath himself ridicules David. And the Philistine, in verse 41, and the Philistine moved forward and came near to David with his shield bearer in front of him. And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy, handsome in appearance. And the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David and his gods. Verse 44, the Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. You see, sometimes we need criticism because it tests our clarity, our community, and our courage. And in that moment of criticism, David found his courage. This is what he said in 45. You come at me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand. And I will strike you down, and I'm going to cut off your head, and I will give the dead bodies of the host of Philistines that are all here looking at this right now this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, and all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, not in Philistine, but in Israel, and all this assembly that's around here, my brothers will know that the Lord saves, not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into my hand today. And look what he does. He meets him in battle in the field. Verse 44, when the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line, met the Philistine, and David put his hand in his bag, and he took out a stone, slung it, and struck the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone and struck the Philistine and killed him. And he lay there dead. But David was not finished because David had made a promise. He said this was not his first rodeo, and he told him what he was going to do. So he looked at all the Philistines on their side. He looked at all the Israelites on his side, and he got Goliath's sword and he cut his head off, and he held it up so that all the Philistines could see this was not his first rodeo. And he held it to his brothers, the Israelites, and they, through this confidence of seeing the slain Goliath, they got confidence and they shouted out, "Yeah!" and went and battled the Philistines and fed the birds of the air and the beasts of the field, fed their bellies until they were stuffed with the flesh of the Philistines. This was not David's first rodeo. This confidence that he has because of his clarity and because of his community and his courage and his consistency, this confidence became contagious. You see, confidence breeds confidence. You need to do you, boo-boo, because the people around you need it too, because it bolsters their confidence as well. So as you look in your lives, and you look at these battles ahead of you, what's your clarity? Who are you? To whom do you belong? Has anybody told you what your gifts are and what you can do? Are you sure that you know who you belong to and what group you're about? Or have you bought into the bull that your primary identity is something other than the people of God? Do you have a community around you that's helping you to identify these gifts and to engage with the body of Christ? Do they challenge you? Do they affirm you and hold you accountable to what you were made to do? Do you have the courage to step up and do life as you, not as somebody else, not as your mentor, not as your father, not as whoever, as you, the beautiful you that God made in this world to do his work? Can you do it consistently, and can you overcome the criticism out there so that you can live into your confidence and bolster the confidence in others? Do you have that? What would it look like if everybody in here was able to do you, boo-boo? What if everybody in here, helping one another out, was able to go with confidence into their next thing? How would that affect this church? How much confidence would that bolster in the members of this church? How much confidence would that bolster in the members of this community? At your work, at school, on the baseball field, in your home? What would that do to this next year and how people are engaging with one another if we as a community have the confidence to live into all the ways that God had made us, and that confidence came from the heart of the very people of God itself? That when they saw us, they would say, look at them doing what they've been made to do. I want to do the same thing. The impact would spread for miles, and everyone would know that there is a God in Collin County. Amen. And this is not his first rodeo. Thank you very much.